The shuttle descended through the massive docking bay of Station Chorus 7. And inside that small vessel sat a young man who had no idea what waited for him beyond those metal doors. Elias Vance pressed his face against the viewport and watched as the Galactic Coalition Military Academy revealed itself in all its intimidating glory, with towers of gleaming steel stretching toward artificial skies and training grounds that spread across kilometers of constructed terrain. He was 23 years old, born on a small farm in Montana on a planet called Earth, and he was about to become the first human ever admitted to the most prestigious military institution in known space. The shuttle touched down with a gentle hum, and the doors slid open to reveal a world that made Elias feel very small indeed. Cadets of a dozen different species moved through the arrival plaza, and every single one of them towered over the human who stepped onto the polished floor with a single bag over his shoulder. A group of Crethi marched past him in perfect formation, their bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, and each one stood at least 2.5 meters tall, with mandibles that could crush steel. Behind them came a pair of Valani, sleek and graceful with 4 arms each, their silver skin reflecting the station lights as they discussed something in their musical language. And then there were the Gorvathi, massive creatures of muscle and bone who made the Crethi look small, with fists the size of Elias's entire torso and eyes that held nothing but cold assessment. Every single one of them glanced at Elias as they passed, and every single one of them looked away just as quickly, dismissing him as something not worth remembering. He was used to this by now. The Coalition had only made contact with Earth 15 years ago, and in that time, humanity had earned a reputation as a curiosity rather than a power. A species that lived on a hostile world and somehow survived despite having no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, and no special abilities worth mentioning. The other species called Earth a death world, a planet so dangerous that it should have killed everything on it long ago. And they could not understand how such soft and fragile creatures had clawed their way to the top of its food chain. Elias understood their confusion, but he also knew something they didn't know. Walked through the plaza toward the registration center. Ignoring the stares and the whispers that followed him like shadows, a young Valani female stood behind the registration desk, and her forearms moved with perfect efficiency as she processed the cadets ahead of him in line. When Elias reached the front, she looked down at him with an expression he had seen many times before, a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Human," she said, and her voice carried no hostility but also no warmth. "You are Cadet Vance, the first of your kind to attend this academy, and I have been instructed to inform you that special accommodations have been made for your physical limitations." "I do not need special accommodations," Elias replied in a calm and steady voice. The Valani blinked all 4 of her eyes at once, clearly surprised by his response. "Your species requires specific atmospheric conditions, temperature ranges, and nutritional supplements that are not standard on this station," she explained. "And the medical staff has prepared a regimen to ensure your survival during training. I appreciate their concern," Elias said, "but I will train with everyone else under standard conditions." She stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged with 2 of her shoulders and handed him his assignment chip. "Barrack 7, Bunk 12, and may the stars watch over you." "Human." Elias took the chip and walked away without another word. The barracks were exactly what he had expected. A long hall filled with bunks designed for creatures much larger than himself. And when he found his assigned space, he discovered that his mattress was the size of a small vehicle. 3 other cadets already occupied the room, and all 3 of them stopped talking the moment he entered. The first was a Crethi, whose armor was a deep shade of crimson, and he introduced himself as Vorath with a clicking sound that passed for politeness among his people. The second was a Valani male named Sen, younger than the female at registration, but with the same 4 arms and silver skin. The third was a Gorvathi. And when Elias saw him, he understood immediately that this one would be a problem. The Gorvathi stood nearly 3 meters tall, with arms thicker than Elias's entire body, and a face that seemed designed for violence. And when he looked at the human, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth the size of fingers. "This is the human," the Gorvathi said, and his voice was like rocks grinding together. "I am Dren, and I want you to know that I opposed your admission to this academy with every resource available to me. I appreciate your honesty." Elias replied and took a step forward, and the floor trembled beneath his weight. "Your species is weak," he continued. "You have no armor, no claws, no strength worth measuring, and you will not survive the first month of training." "Perhaps," Elias said, and he set his bag down on his oversized bunk. "But I intend to try." Dren snorted and turned away, clearly deciding that the human was not worth any more of his attention. Varath and Sen exchanged glances, but said nothing, and Elias could see in their eyes that they had already written him off as well. That night, while the other cadets slept, Elias left the barracks and made his way to the training grounds. The station never truly grew dark, but the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night, and the training areas were empty and silent. Elias began to run. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for rest. And then he kept running. He ran until the artificial dawn began to brighten the sky. And only then did he return to the barracks and collapse onto his bunk for a few hours of sleep. Before training began, nobody saw him, and nobody knew, but somewhere in the command center, a security feed recorded everything. And Commander Desik watched the human run with a frown on his armored face. "Interesting," he said to himself. Though he did not yet understand what he was seeing, the human was weak and small and fragile. Everyone knew this. But something about the way he pushed himself through the darkness made the commander uneasy. He dismissed the feeling and returned to his duties, certain that the human would wash out within weeks. He had no idea how wrong he was. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Elias Vance's life, and that was saying something for a man who had grown up on a planet that tried to kill its inhabitants every single day. Training at the Galactic Coalition Military Academy was designed for species with natural advantages that humans simply did not possess. And every single exercise reminded Elias of this fact in painful and humiliating ways. The strength assessments required cadets to lift massive weights that the Gorvathi handled with ease, and Elias could barely move the lightest setting on the machines. The speed trials sent cadets sprinting across obstacle courses designed for creatures with 4 legs or wings or natural climbing abilities. And Elias finished last in every single race. The combat simulations pitted cadets against holographic enemies that required armor to withstand and claws to defeat. And Elias took more hits than anyone else in his entire training group. His scores placed him at the very bottom of the rankings. And the other cadets began to treat him not with hostility, but with something worse. They treated him with pity. "The human is trying so hard," he heard Avalani whisper to her friend one morning. "It is almost sad to watch. He should return to his death world," Akrethe responded. "This is no place for prey animals." Elias heard every word, and he said nothing in response. He simply returned to his training and pushed himself harder than before. But while most of the cadets ignored him or pitied him, one had decided to make his life actively miserable. Dren, the Gorvathi, had found a new hobby, and that hobby was tormenting the human cadet. It started with small things. Accidents that were not really accidents at all. Elias would walk through the mess hall with his food tray, and suddenly Dren would appear beside him, and somehow the tray would end up on the floor. Elias would be walking to his next class, and a massive shoulder would slam into him from behind, sending him crashing into the wall. Elias would reach for his training equipment, and he would find it broken or missing or covered in something foul every single time. Dren would look down at him with those cruel eyes and smile with those terrible teeth. "My apologies." "Human," he would say in a voice dripping with false sincerity. "I did not see you there." The other cadets saw what was happening, but none of them intervened. This was the way of the academy, survival of the fittest. And if the human could not defend himself, then he did not deserve to be here. Elias understood this. And he did not ask for help, he simply endured one evening. After a particularly brutal day of training, Elias sat alone in the medical bay having his wounds treated by an automated system. The door opened, and a Vellani female entered with a datapad in two of her hands. She was the same one from the registration desk. And when she saw Elias, she stopped and tilted her head with curiosity. "You are injured again." "Human," she observed. "I noticed." Elias replied. She walked closer and examined the display showing his vital signs. And her 4 eyes widened with surprise. "These readings are remarkable," she said. "You have suffered damage that would incapacitate most species. And yet your body is already beginning to heal itself. Humans are good at healing." Elias said. "I am Yura," the Vellani told him. "I am a medical cadet, and I have been studying your species since I learned one of you would be attending the academy. What have you learned?" Elias asked Yura, sat down beside him, and began scrolling through her datapad with all 4 hands moving in perfect coordination. "Your species is fascinating," she said. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Nothing that should allow you to survive on your homeworld. And yet we survived," Elias pointed out. "Yes, and I cannot understand how," Yura admitted. "I have read about Earth, about its predators and its poisons and its extreme environments, and none of it makes sense." Elias smiled. And it was the first time he had smiled since arriving at the academy. "Would you like me to explain?" He asked. Yura nodded eagerly, and Elias began to talk. He told her about the human body, about how it could regulate its own temperature through sweating, something that most species could not do. He told her about endurance, about how ancient humans would hunt by simply following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, running for days without stopping. He told her about adrenaline, the chemical that flooded human bodies in moments of danger and allowed them to perform feats of strength and speed that should have been impossible. He told her about pain tolerance, about how humans could continue functioning through injuries that would shut down other species completely. He told her about spite, about the human tendency to keep going simply because someone told them. They could note. Yura listened to all of this with growing amazement. And when he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "You are not fragile at all," she finally said. "You are something else entirely. We are stubborn," Elias agreed. "It is perhaps our greatest strength." Yura looked at him with new respect. But then her expression shifted to concern. "I must warn you about something," she said. "Dren's behavior is escalating, and I have seen this pattern before." "I know," Elias said. "The instructors will not intervene," Yura continued. "It is not their way. I know that too." "Then what will you do?" she asked. Elias stood up from the medical bed and tested his newly healed limbs. "I will keep going," he said. "It is what humans do." Yura watched him leave, and she felt a strange sensation in her chest that she did not recognize. It was the beginning of admiration. That night, Elias returned to the training grounds after everyone else had gone to sleep, and he ran until his body screamed for mercy. Then he ran some more in the command center. Commander Desik watched the security feeds with growing unease. The human had not taken a single rest day since arriving at the academy, and his body showed no signs of breaking down despite the constant punishment. "What are you?" Desik muttered to himself. He had opposed humanity's admission to the coalition with every argument he could muster, and he had expected the human cadet to prove him right instead. The human was proving something else entirely. Something that Desik was not yet ready to understand, but understanding was coming, whether he wanted it or not, and it would arrive in a way that none of them expected. The day of the combat evaluation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Dark and inevitable, and filled with the promise of violence, every cadet in the academy knew what this day meant. A free-form melee in the great training arena where they would be tested not on their individual skills, but on their ability to survive. Chaos Commander Desik stood on the observation platform above the arena floor, his armored body reflecting the harsh lights as he addressed the assembled cadets below. "Today, you will face each other in combat," he announced, his voice carrying across the massive space. "Your weapons have been blunted to prevent death, but injuries are expected and encouraged." He paused and let his gaze sweep across the crowd of young warriors. "Medical drones will be monitoring each of you, and any cadet who suffers incapacitating damage will be extracted from the arena immediately." Elias stood among the other cadets, looking impossibly small compared to the armored giants around him. He could feel eyes on him from every direction, some curious, some pitying, and one pair burning with cruel anticipation. Dran stood on the opposite side of the arena, and when their eyes met, the Gorvathi smiled with all of his terrible teeth. "Begin." Commander Desik roared. The arena exploded into chaos cadets of every species, clashed with each other in a storm of fists and claws and blunted weapons, and the sound of combat filled the air like thunder. Elias moved through the chaos with careful steps, avoiding the larger battles and watching for threats from every direction. He did not expect to win this evaluation. He only wanted to survive it, but Dren had other plans. The massive Gorvathi carved through the melee like a ship through water, shoving aside anyone who got in his way. As he made straight for the human cadet, Elias saw him coming and tried to move away, but there was nowhere to go. The other cadets had formed a ring around them, stepping back to watch what everyone knew was about to happen. Nowhere to run. "Human!" Dren growled. Elias raised his hands in a defensive position that looked almost comical compared to the mountain of muscle bearing down on him. "I was not planning to run," he replied. Dren's fist came forward like a meteor, and it struck Elias directly in the ribs with a sound that echoed across the entire arena. The biometric displays on the observation platform lit up with data, and a collective gasp rose from the watching cadets. The impact force registered at a level that would crack Gorvathi bone, a level that would rupture Villani organs, a level that should have killed a human instantly. Elias flew backward and crashed to the ground, and for a long moment he did not move. The medical drones activated and began flying toward his fallen form, their sensors already preparing for extraction. Commander Desik's hand moved toward the manual override, ready to end this before the human was beaten to death. And then Elias stood up. The arena went silent. Every single cadet stopped fighting and turned to watch as the human rose from the ground, unshaking. Leg's blood ran from his mouth, and his arm hung at a wrong angle, and his breathing came in ragged gasps that sounded like tearing paper. But he was standing, and then he took a step forward. The medical drones hovered in confusion, their programming unable to process what they were seeing, because their protocols required the subject to be incapacitated, and this subject was walking. Dren stared at the human with something new in his eyes, something he had never felt before in his entire life. It was the first hint of fear. "Stay down." The Gorvathi ordered. Elias took another step. "I said stay down." Dren roared, and he threw another punch that caught Elias in the chest and sent him crashing to the ground again. This time the biometric display showed readings that made Yura cry out in horror. From her position in the medical station, the human's ribs were broken, his internal organs were bruised, and his body was flooding with stress hormones at levels that should have triggered immediate shutdown. But Elias stood up again. He stood up, and he looked at Dren with eyes that held no anger and no fear. Only a quiet determination that the Gorvathi could not understand. "What are you?" Dren whispered. Elias did not answer. He simply stepped forward again. Dren hit him a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, each blow harder than the last. Each impact registering on the displays as enough force to hospitalize any species in the known galaxy. And every single time, Elias fell, and every single time Elias got back up, the arena remained frozen in absolute silence as the impossible scene unfolded before them. Cadets, who had spent their entire lives believing that strength meant armor and claws and raw power, watched a creature with none of these things refused to stay on the ground. Commander Desik's hand had fallen away from the override, and he watched with an expression that no one had ever seen on his face before. It was the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the universe was being rewritten in real time finally, after what felt like hours, but was only minutes. The evaluation timer ran out, and a horn sounded across the arena. The combat was over. Elias stood in the center of a circle of stunned cadets, swaying on his feet like a tree in a hurricane. His body was broken in more places than Yura could count. His blood was pooling on the arena floor, and by every medical standard, he should have been dead or unconscious or at least screaming in agony. But he was standing, and he was looking at Dren with those quiet, steady eyes. The Gorvathi took a step backward. It was a small step, barely noticeable, but everyone saw it. The strongest cadet in the academy, the warrior who had never known defeat, had retreated from a creature half his size with no armor and no claws and no weapons, because for the first time in his life, Dren had encountered something that his strength could not break. The medical drones finally moved in, and Elias allowed them to guide him toward the medical bay without resistance. As he walked past Dren, he paused for just a moment. "Good fight," he said, and then he continued walking behind him. The arena remained silent, and every cadet present knew that they had witnessed something that would change everything they believed about strength and weakness, and what it truly meant to be dangerous. Commander Desik watched the human disappear through the medical bay doors, and he finally understood what he had been seeing on those late-night security feeds. The human was not training to become stronger. He was training to become unstoppable, and that was a very different thing indeed. Elias Vance spent 6 days in the medical bay, and during that time, the entire academy could talk of nothing else but what had happened in the arena. The story spread through the station like fire through dry grass, growing larger with each telling, until some versions claimed the human had fought for hours, and others insisted he had actually won the battle. The truth was remarkable enough without exaggeration. But truth had never stopped a good story from becoming legend. Yura barely left the medical bay during those 6 days, monitoring the humans' condition with a combination of professional interest and personal concern that she did not fully understand what she observed. Defied everything she had learned about biology in her years of medical training. This should not be possible, she muttered to herself on the third day, staring at the readout showing Elias's healing progress. His bones were knitting themselves back together at a rate that would have required advanced medical intervention for any other species. His torn muscles were rebuilding fiber by fiber. His bruised organs were returning to normal function, and his body was doing all of this on its own with no outside assistance. Elias lay on the medical bed with his eyes closed. But he was not asleep. What should not be possible? Yaskadira jumped in surprise, then composed herself and turned to face him. "Your recovery," she said. "The damage you sustained should have killed you, or at least left permanent harm. But your body is healing itself, as if it was designed for exactly this kind of punishment." Elias opened his eyes and smiled, though the expression carried a hint of pain. "Human bodies are designed for exactly this kind of punishment," he said. "We evolved on a world that never stopped trying to kill us. So we became very good at not dying. Yura pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. All four of her hands folded in her lap. "Tell me more," she said. "I need to understand how this is possible." And so Elias told her. He told her about the human immune system, a complex network of biological defenses that learned from every threat it encountered and became stronger. Because I told her about human bones, which could break and then heal back stronger than before. A process that seemed like magic to species whose skeletal structures were fixed and unchanging. Told her about the human brain, which could block pain signals when survival required it, and release chemicals that push the body far beyond its normal limits. He told her about persistence hunting, the ancient practice that had shaped human evolution for millions of years. Our ancestors did not have claws or fangs or venom, Elias explained. We could not catch our prey in a sprint or overpower it with strength. And how did you hunt? Yura asked. We followed, Elias said. We tracked our prey across the land, walking and running at a steady pace. And when the animals stopped to rest, we kept coming. He paused and looked at the ceiling of the medical bay. Hours would pass, then days, and still we kept coming, always moving, never stopping. And eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion because it could not regulate its temperature the way we could. Yura felt a chill run down her spine, and she was not sure why. You hunted by refusing to give up, she said quietly. We survived by refusing to give up, Elias corrected. Hunting was just one application of that stubbornness. He turned his head to look at her directly. That is what you saw in the arena. Yura, you saw a human doing what humans have always done when faced with something stronger than themselves. And what is that? She asked. We endure, Elias said. We take the hit, and we get back up, and we keep moving forward. Because stopping means death, and we refuse to die. Yura sat in silence for a long time, processing everything she had learned outside the medical bay. The academy buzzed with activity as cadets from every species sought out information about humans. The station's library reported a surge in requests for Earth-related files. And what the cadets found in those records only deepened their shock. They learned about the wars that humans had fought against each other. Conflicts that killed millions, yet somehow failed to break the species. They learned about the diseases that had swept across human populations throughout history. Plagues that wiped out huge portions of their civilization, only for the survivors to rebuild and grow stronger. They learned about the environments that humans had conquered. From frozen wastelands to burning deserts to the depths of their own oceans. Places that should have been fatal yet became homes. They learned about human medicine, about how the species had learned to cut open their own bodies and repair themselves from the inside, about how they had created artificial organs and mechanical limbs for those whose original parts had failed, and they learned about the human spirit, the quality that drove this strange soft species to keep fighting long after any reasonable creature would have surrendered in his private quarters. Commander Thesic read through Earth's history files for the third time. He had been a soldier for over a century, and he had faced enemies that would have terrified most species in the galaxy. But reading about humans made him feel something he had not felt in decades. It was not quite fear, but it was close. These creatures had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities, and yet they had conquered their death world and spread across its surface like an unstoppable tide. They had looked at predators with claws and teeth and venom and said, we will not run. And then they had hunted those predators to extinction. They had faced ice ages and asteroid impacts and their own terrible weapons. And they had survived every single catastrophe through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Now one of them was lying in his medical bay, healing from wounds that would have killed any Krethi warrior. And he would be back on his feet within days. Thesic set down his datapad and stared at the wall of his quarters. I was wrong about them, he admitted. To the empty room, the human was not the weakest cadet in the academy. The human was something else entirely. Something that Vesic was only beginning to understand, and in a galaxy full of powerful species with claws and armor and natural weapons. The commander was starting to suspect that the soft, fragile humans might be the most dangerous of them all, not because they could not be broken, but because breaking them only made them try harder. He would have to watch the human cadet more closely from now on. Something told him that Elias Vance was going to change everything they thought they knew about strength. Elias Vance walked out of the medical bay on the 7th day, and the academy that greeted him was not the same one he had entered. The hallways that had once buzzed with whispers about the weak human cadet now fell silent when he passed, and the eyes that followed him held something very different from pity. Dren was waiting outside the barracks when Elias arrived, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other. The Gorvathi's massive form still dwarfed the human, but something had shifted in the space between them, a change that had nothing to do with size or strength. Human, Dren said, and his voice was quieter than Elias had ever heard it. Gorvathi, Elias replied. Dren stood in silence for several heartbeats, his huge hands opening and closing at his sides as if he was struggling to find words that did not come naturally to him. I do not understand you, he finally admitted. I hit you with everything I had, blows that would have killed warriors twice your size, and you kept standing. I fell down many times, Elias pointed out. But you got back up, Dren said. Every single time you got back up. And I do not understand how that is possible. Elias considered the question carefully before answering. On my world, there is a saying, he said. It goes like this: fall down 7 times. Stand up 8. Dren's face twisted in confusion. That does not make mathematical sense, he said. No, Elias agreed. But it makes human sense. He walked past the Gorvathi and entered the barracks, leaving Dren standing alone with questions he might never fully answer. The days that followed brought changes that Elias had not expected. Cadets who had ignored him before now sought him out, asking questions about Earth and humanity with genuine curiosity rather than condescension. The Crethi began training with him in the evenings, studying the human's technique and trying to understand how such a small creature could absorb so much punishment. The Villani started joining their sessions, his forearms moving in complex patterns as he adapted human endurance strategies to his own biology. Even Dren kept his distance but watched from the shadows, observing the human with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The rankings still showed Elias near the bottom in raw physical metrics. His strength and speed and natural abilities could not compete with species designed for combat, but during an emergency drill that simulated a station breach, something remarkable happened. The drill required cadets to seal hull fractures, rescue trapped personnel, and maintain defensive positions against simulated invaders, all while dealing with failing life support and escalating chaos. It was designed to push cadets to their absolute limits and beyond. One by one, the strongest cadets began to rotate out, their bodies exhausted from the constant demands of the simulation. The Gorvathi went first, their massive muscles burning through energy reserves faster than they could be replenished. The Crethi followed, their armored bodies overheating without proper rest cycles. The Villani lasted longer, their efficient physiology giving them an edge. But eventually, they too reached their breaking points 9 hours into the drill. Only a handful of cadets remained active. Elias Vance was one of them. He moved through the simulated disaster with steady determination. Not fast, not strong, but constant when others collapsed from exhaustion. He kept working when systems failed and alarms screamed and everything seemed hopeless. He kept moving when the drill finally ended at the 12-hour mark. Elias was still on his feet, still functioning, still ready for whatever came next. Commander, Thesic observed the final results with an expression that his subordinates could not read. The next morning, he called a full assembly of all cadets, the great hall filled with young warriors of every species. Hundreds of future soldiers standing in perfect formation as their commander took his place on the raised platform. Thesic looked out at them for a long moment before speaking. When this academy was founded, we measured species by their natural weapons, he began. We valued armor and claws and venom, the gifts that evolution had given to make warriors strong. He paused and let his gaze sweep across the assembled cadets. We overlooked the Volani because they had none of these things. And we paid for that arrogance when they outhought every enemy they faced. Several Volani cadets stood a little straighter at these words. We made the same mistake with the humans. Thesic continued. We saw soft skin and short lifespans and assumed fragility. We looked at a species with no natural weapons and decided they were prey. His eyes found Elias in the crowd. We did not understand. The hall was absolutely silent. Every cadet hanging on the commander's words, Cadet Vance, received a blow in the combat evaluation that would have hospitalized any of you, Thesic said. I have reviewed the biometric data, and by every medical standard, he should have been extracted from the arena immediately. He stepped forward to the edge of the platform, but the human kept walking. The words hung in the air like a judgment. He was struck again and again. Damage that would have killed Volani and cracked Krethi armor and given even Gorvathi pause. And every single time he stood back up and kept walking, Thesic's voice rose, filling the great hall with absolute authority. That is not weakness, cadets. That is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He pointed directly at Elias, and every eye in the room turned to the small human standing among giants. An enemy who does not know when to die cannot be defeated through strength alone. Thesic declared, you can break them and they heal. You can knock them down and they rise. You can throw everything you have at them and they simply keep coming. He lowered his hand and looked down at the assembled cadets. The humans conquered their death world not through armor or claws or venom, but through the simple refusal to stop. And that stubbornness is more terrifying than any natural weapon I have ever encountered. The silence stretched on for several heartbeats. Remember this lesson, Thesic concluded. Strength is not always about what you can dish out. Sometimes strength is about what you can endure. He dismissed the assembly, and the cadets filed out in subdued silence. Elias remained standing in the empty hall for a long moment after everyone else had left. Ira found him there, her silver skin catching the light as she approached. How do you feel? She asked. Elias looked at her and smiled, a genuine expression that warmed his tired eyes. Sore, he admitted. But I have felt worse. She laughed, a musical sound that echoed through the empty space. What will you do now? She asked. Elias turned toward the exit, toward the training grounds and the challenges that still awaited him. The same thing I have always done, he said. He started walking because that was what humans did. They fell down, and they got back up, and they kept moving forward, no matter what. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species were beginning to understand that the small, soft, fragile creatures from the death world called Earth were not prey at all. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, and survivors